Well, hey, all you wiretappers out there. Good to be back here in the studio of Gangland Wire. I am here with Anthony Arillotta. As you guys, if you are on Facebook at all or on YouTube, you may know this name. He has been quite prolific and he's got a great book out there and he's got a hell of a story to tell. And I just told Anthony, I said, you're a great interview because you know your stuff. And Anthony, you really do. Welcome, Anthony.
Oh, thank you, Gary. Thank you for having me. Looking forward to this.
Now, the book is South End Syndicate: How I Took Over the Genovese Springfield Crew. And so, I want to read just a little bit about one thing. I'm really impressed with this particular promos for your book, little blurbs that you get other authors to write in your book. T.J. English, who is New York Times best-selling author of The Westies and several others, and I just interviewed him recently, a prince of a fella, and this guy's word means something to me. And T.J. writes, the last days of the Roman Empire, if you were populated by snitches, gamblers, mobsters, lowlifes, and homicidal maniacs. In other words, this book is entertaining as hell, chronicling one small parochial, though notorious faction of the American mafia in Springfield, Massachusetts. Arillotta tells the story of the whole damn thing. South End Syndicate is a worthy addition to any organized crime bookshelf. So, Anthony, that's quite a compliment from a guy like T.J. English, wouldn't you agree?
Oh, I agree, definitely. That was a really good write up that he gave, and he knows the genre.
The
So
genre, he
yeah,
does. He knows how to write it, and he knows it. He
yeah,
really knows it. He really does. I
yeah.
was,
And
like I said,
he can detect the true to the
yeah,
fake. Oh,
yeah.
yeah,
He's got a good bullshit detector.
yeah,
I could tell that when I interviewed him.
yeah. That was really impressive.
Anyhow, so let's get down to talking about the book. Right now, you're not in witness protection or anything. You did testify, but you're not in witness protection. So I've noticed there's a lot of guys like that out there that are living on the streets. So much for the old get you no matter what. In the end,
Mm,
uh, you wrote this book about your life, but you also talked a little bit about the old days, I believe. Let's talk about the old days in Springfield, Mass, just a little bit before we get into that. I interviewed this, I think it was Gina Cunningham. Her grandmother was Pasqualina Albano, and she had and that's a heck of a story. There's a lot of inner fighting and all that going on. And that was when Springfield got connected to the Genovese family in New York. Could you explain to the guys kind of how that first worked, how the Springfield became basically a crew, or maybe not a crew, but its own entity, but yet we're connected to the Genovese family?
yeah. So, like you have drugs today, you had alcohol back then. Organized crime really wasn't established at that time where they had traditional mafia families back in the early 1900s, but you still had Italian immigrants, and with that came a way that the Italians lived and brought their traditional ways over to America. And so, they got involved in bootlegging, protection rackets, some of the same rackets that continued on throughout the years. Springfield was heavily populated with and a large Italian immigrant city. It was flooded. A lot of from Calabria, Naples, Sicilians, all throughout Italy. It just flooded into Western Mass to Springfield. And so back in those days, there was a lot of gang activity, like you would call today. It was the same thing, gang activity, only it was, instead of Latinos and blacks and, whatever other Chinese, it was, a lot of Italian, Jewish, and Irish gangsters, you would call them. And so Springfield was heavily populated with that. They started to create some known figures back then. And just with through the hustling and the bootlegging, created an organized crime presence throughout Western Mass and Springfield. How they got involved later on with the New York connections were, New York is heavily populated, and then it's only 2 hours away from Springfield. So,
Oh, really?
there was some big heavyweights, and a lot of people are related. This one particular guy, the Miranda family, They were like heavyweights in the Genovese family. And so I believe Philomena ended up marrying one of the Mirandas. One of her husbands was a Miranda, and he was, I believe it was Mike ended up being on the later on, in like maybe in the 50s, but he was like on one of the panel administration for the Genovese crime family, and he had relatives in here. He was related to the Fioris, and so it's just like they had a satellite crew where Big Nose Sam Kane, he was from Calabria. He was you know was in New York, but then came to Springfield, and so you got these active organized crime criminals, and that's when the mafia started to get organized, in the 30s, and started to get structure and territories. They started getting the territories down, so there's no, they could stop the violence and the murders, and have like territories split out so everyone could earn peacefully. And Big No Sam Kafari ended up being one of the well, you're going back to like, Philomena. She was actually a woman. I think they shot her like 30 times. And there was a few murders. The guy, the one of the bosses, Siniscalchi, he was murdered. Fiore, I believe, was murdered. There was a lot of brutal murders back in the early 1900s here. And so when Sam came in, he kind of solidified his presence. And then the structure came out where there was mafia, induction ceremonies. And Sam ended up lasting from the 30s all the way up into 1984 when he passed away, never spending one night in prison, never going to prison. He was a legendary mafia boss that, you could put up there with Carlo Gambino, Tony Accardo. He was a very notorious, he was at the Appalachian meeting in 1957 when all the mobsters got rounded up, and he was there as a representative. So, yeah, and that's how Springfield pretty much formed its base with the Genovese side through. I know the Mirandas had a big role in it because of blood ties.
Yeah, that I think that Mike Miranda was when Vito Genovese went into the penitentiary. He appointed a three-person commission to keep running the Genovese family, and he was one of those three people. And then he had these relatives out here in Western Mass, so just a natural kind of a connection. It sounds to me like pretty interesting stuff. How that developed. You mentioned about comparing this to blacks or Latinos today and the gangs. Anytime you have a large cohort of people, newly arrived immigrants. And so Italians get here. What I've noticed in Kansas City, the Italians got here. Well, the Irish had been here for quite a while, and they had all the police and fire and, trash hauling jobs, a lot of the lower end jobs sewed up, and the unions, and they had all that sewed up, and a lot of politics already sewed up. So the Italians get here, and they're kept out. They're not going to allow them to come in
Of course not.
any more than they can. So then you've got all these young, bright guys. Prohibition comes along, and hey, here's a way we can help our people and help ourselves and get a piece of the American pie. Everybody just wants a piece of the American pie, and that's what they wanted at the time. So it's and it's still going on today. I would say at a greater or lesser extent.
So Springfield had the Italian section back then, was the South End of Springfield. But prior to that, like when my grandfather was here, the North End had Italians, the South End, six corners of Springfield was heavily populated with Irish and Italian. That's where I grew up at first, was Six Corners, Springfield. And uh, throughout the city and throughout the suburbs of cities, there was many Italian restaurants that, instead of just being all stuck down in the South End, just like it is today, you could go anywhere throughout Springfield and the suburbs and eat authentic Italian meals from people that come right from Italy. To this day, they still have their families heavily involved in the restaurant business. So I grew up in Springfield. The South End when I was growing up, was basically the Italian section still. All my friends lived down there. I lived down there for a period of time. And, as you get older, people move out. They want to get a better life. They want more peace and quiet. They move into a quieter neighborhood. And so with that, the next immigrants that are coming in, Spanish, started moving in. So the more Italians are moving out. And then next thing you know, little, but it still remained Italian businesses down there, and where we hung around growing up my whole life, and it was great. It was like I said, the presence back then. We had hundreds of guys lined up on corners all the way down Main Street. You know, you had the youngest guys like would be us. Then you had a little bit older across the street. Then you had a little bit older, a few blocks down, a little bit older, another. And then you had all like we call them the grease balls from Italy, all down because we had a lot of Italian social clubs. Italians come over, the wife, they want to get away from their wives, go out, play a little cards, have an espresso. And we had three Italian clubs down the South End. And it was, we had restaurants, pastry shops, coffee shops, everything you could think of. And it was really nice growing up. And it was just a nice, the camaraderie of being Italian, growing up with that, because it doesn't exist anymore here. And it really doesn't exist anymore throughout the country. You go down, Boston to me has the best Italian neighborhood in America. And the only reason that is still existing, all them, they moved out too, but Boston remains expensive to live there. So all the tenements above, mostly college kids, they're paying 4 or 5 thousand a month for rent, more for one bedroom apartment. So
Yeah.
you don't have any criminal activity there, and all the rest, and it's loaded still with Italian restaurants and coffee shops, one after another page. So it's still got that Italian neighborhood feel to it, and especially the streets are so narrow. Springfield lost all that. We still have some of the places where you can go buy your cold cuts and shop sausage and coffee shops and things like that, but it's nowhere near what it was back when I was growing up. And it was just a really good growing up in Springfield. We had a little gang of us. We had a big gang of us actually, and my generation was right around 4 or 5 years younger than me, was kind of like the last generation that grew up down the South End where we were as hanging around on corners. My father was 100% probably one of the hardest working men I know. And I'm not just saying it because he's my father. Anybody from here will tell you, and he was a sweetheart of a guy, and everybody will tell you that. You know, he was a hardworking man. His only thing that he liked to do, and it's not illegal, but he liked to bet on the sporting games, and he was pretty good at it. A lot of people would come and ask him for their picks, and he was actually good at picking the games, and that was his only thing he liked to do. Work. He was a sports fanatic, and play golf and work. And he worked 7 days a week, hard work, hard work, hard work. But being Italian, the mobsters would frequent his store, and they were always around. I had family members also that were involved in the mafia, but not my father.
Growing up, you grow up in this environment as a young man, and you're looking for opportunities and jobs. And so how did you start becoming involved? What pulled you into that life?
So I was always a wild kid growing up, getting in trouble at school, fighting all the time. I never had to worry about money because my father, like I said, was a hardworking man. He had one of the biggest businesses in Springfield. He was into the fruit and produce and the wine grape business. He was the biggest wine grape distributor in all of Mass. So I lived at home. I didn't have to worry about food on the table, paying any bills, which, I believe is bad for a kid not doing that, because it puts you in a complacent mindset and you don't got that hustle instinct. Whereas another kid grows up poor, he's out shining shoes at 8 years old. He's trying to help, he wants what the other kids have. So I never had to do that. I just got involved because I loved the action. I also was a huge gambler. It started off with me gambling and, betting on sporting events at a young age. Like I was in the second grade. It's in school, betting 25 cents a game, with the little kid then. And it just, went crazy. And and then, in my teens, always getting in trouble. And Mafia had a huge presence. And, John Gotti had just killed Castellano. I'm only like 16 years old. The Mafia was, big time news back then. I mean, it was nationwide, worldwide news. And to be involved with the Mafia meant something. So everybody, it's like, oh, I know, if you knew the boss, if people like Sam Kafari, oh, I'm friends with Sam. Oh, I'm friends with Sam. I'm better friends with them. They wanted to be around the mafia. If they knew the mafia hung around at this restaurant, they all wanted to go to that restaurant. That's what it was like. So I just started a wild kid gambling. And of course the mobsters knew me because they know everybody in our
Yeah.
area, especially the ones that are a little bit crazy and wild. And I just started getting involved more. I ended up getting a shooting case back in 1990, and I got a 5-year sentence. That is when I came, and I dabbled a little bit in some drugs prior to that, selling drugs. I never used drugs, but selling drugs, I just was small time prior to that. I went to state prison in 1990 for a shooting case. I got a 5-year sentence with a mandatory 1 year. When I came out of that prison sentence after the year, that's when I was pretty much I knew where I was headed. The streets were for me. That's when I got approached by Bruno. He was a cousin on my mother's side. He was a made member of the mafia. He approached me. There was another made guy that wanted me to be with him, but Bruno was the one that came to me first. He put me on record with him, meaning that I was now associated with the Springfield faction of the Genovese crime family. That was in 1991. And I just started hustling the streets with him. And that's how I started getting involved, with the mafia activity. But I was also involved with my own criminal activity. I was a large marijuana distributor.
Mhm.
And that was where I made 90% of my money back then, was in the marijuana industry. I mean, I don't want to say 90%, but the bulk of my money and the mafia had nothing to do with that. So I was a large marijuana distributor. I was in the cocaine business. I don't consider it big, a few kilos a month. Um, I was in, but the marijuana business, I was the one of the largest, if not the largest, in Connecticut, Massachusetts, areas. And
Yeah.
so
Well,
the money brought me in. The money,
yeah.
I'm a crazy kid now. I already got the violent reputation, and now come with it. At the end, we all want to make money, and I'm not going to make it at my father's business. Hard work, that
Yeah.
business. I mean, backbreaking work. So, and it's his business. He's got my mother and sisters and whatever, his life to live. So I just started making it on the streets, and I made a lot of it. So I did very well.
Interesting. Now, I'm always curious about how some of these things work. Now, did with the marijuana business and the drug business, that was all yours? Did you have to kick anything to anybody? And so that was just yours, and they didn't pay any attention to that. Now, a big marijuana business like that,
They
how'd you make those connections? How do you find somebody that will then bring you, bales and bales of marijuana and
right,
truckloads of marijuana? How do you find that from the
you know.
streets, from a guy that's just, selling dime bags or whatever for fun, for a little extra shop spending money to get into those big bunches? I'm always curious about that.
So it's not like the mob doesn't, our area, were very strictly enforced no drugs if you were around
Uh,
them. All right. So you could get killed for that. And the Genovese family, there are a lot of hypocrites, because, they sold heroin back in the day. And then they said
yeah.
there's more selling drugs, but some of the guys still did and just don't get caught and you don't get killed and things like that. But when I went to that state prison for a year, I was in a violent state prison, not county, not
Yeah.
local, you know, and I was around guys that were doing life that could never get out. And so I made a lot of contacts with those people.
Okay.
So that's when I pretty much learned how to really be an organized crime criminal rather than being some guy that's just going out having fun, being a fly by night or just doesn't make any money like most of the guys. It's about business sense too, and I have that. So, it'd be the same thing as like a salesman in any business. How does he acquire connections? He goes out and sells. He tries to get accounts, which is to sell his product to, and then he also tries to get a place where he can get a product to sell at a good price.
Mhm.
That's basically what it is. And then you get involved in that business. I started dealing with guys out of Boston at first, and I'm new to the business, so they're charging me way overpriced at first.
Yeah.
But then it got to the point where I got so big, I was selling to Boston. To the guys that thought that they were selling to me, I started selling to them. And that's how I got big in Connecticut. And so I had connections like I can't even I had every ethnic group there was doing business with me.
Mhm.
Heavily involved with Jamaican gangs, and I'm talking the serious Jamaican gangs that were cutting people up in pieces in New
Yeah,
York.
they're
That,
bad. They're bad.
doing business with the Irish, crazy Irish in Boston, lunatics. I was in prison with them, just like us, crazy, stab you, shoot you. They're armored car guys, they're bank guys. I was doing business with the Spanish, mm, tons of Spanish friends doing big business. All the black gangs that I was heavily involved with, and when I say involved, like you network, you work together. And if it might be, I might come to one crew and looking to sell to them, and they'll be like, "Here, look at this." And next thing you know, I'm buying from them
Mm.
and selling to them. And then I might be buying from them and selling to them. It's all, depending on the connections that you make. I had multiple, a lot of them. And then the more you're in it, the more you're learning, the more you're going, the more, you're getting access to better connections. We started doing business in Mexico with the cartels, going over the border and grabbing the marijuana there and then bringing it back from there. It led to that. And Texas, we were getting it from California, locally too. Like local, I got, all the Jamaicans would get 200-300 pounds they'd be bringing me. Their weed, their marijuana was a little bit less, uh more commercial grade, than a lot of, and there's different grades all the way from,
Yeah.
I marijuana for 200 a pound or 6,000 a pound. It all depends on what the market is and where, what your customers want.
So it's just a business. I mean, it's just a regular business,
And it's legal today. It's not
and it's
like
legal today. Yeah.
it's legal. So it's like, crime is an unethical crime to commit. It's legal today. It's just, Uncle Sam wants their money and you're not paying
Yeah.
them. And, and with that, with the street stuff is, you get a lot. I fronted all my stuff. I had times where I had 400,000 or 500,000 on the streets people owed to me,
Yeah.
which I never got beat once. Nobody never not paid me. So, but what I'm saying is like, you network, I get affronted. I fronted to these people, guys selling 10 pounds a week, I'll give them 50. And I don't have to see them for over a month and a half. And
Wow.
so, yeah, it's a networking, it's a legitimate business. Everyone smokes pot. You could go up to a cop, you could approach a cop. Hey,
Yeah.
you could approach a lawyer. You smoke marijuana. I mean, no cop is looking to get you in trouble for buying an ounce of weed. I never sold ounces, but like you could just go up to a cop. They're looking for the heroin guys, the guys selling crack. Remember in the '90s when crack came
Oh
out?
yeah. Oh
The
yeah.
crack guys, even the cocaine guys, because they've started making crack with it. They're looking for the cocaine guys now. So there are big sentences. Marijuana, you get a slap on the wrist, nothing. It was like, in Massachusetts, the law under 50 pounds was a misdemeanor,
Mm.
and I got caught
Wow.
with, it was a misdemeanor.
So now you're making a lot of money, and your friends and Al Bruno's crew see this, I'm sure, and you're a mover, and you're a guy with connections, so you become more valuable to them, to that family, I would imagine. So now, how did he utilize you as you moved into the family more?
Bruno's the type. So Bruno's a businessman just like me. He was great at it. Prior to him being a mobster, he was a salesman and he was great. So I mean, if he never got into the mafia, he would have been a multimillionaire legitimately doing all kinds of stuff. And so how it worked with us is, you know, the money that we made here stayed here. Now that does, it's not like you're not giving up money. How it worked with us, the people that were somebodies that were in the mafia, it would be a partnership. So like when Bruno brought me around, I went partners with him in the sports bookmaking. There was like four of us. So we all got 50% and Bruno got 50%. So if we won 10,000, Bruno got five and we got five. Okay. But a partnership, same thing with the loan sharking. If we had 100,000 out and we were making 4,000 a week, Bruno got two, we got two. Okay. That's how it started back in the early 90s. Then after was just me and Bruno, and I was his partner, and I was getting 50%, he was getting 50%, and all the businesses. So it's not like now if he ever knew the amounts of money that I was bringing in. Like I could care less about, oh, we made we made 100,000 in the sports and I'm going to get 50. You would have to make a week like that for me to say was considerable amount of money because I was making money like that on the side doing everything I did, not just the marijuana. Like I said, I wasn't in the coke business and I was making tens of thousands a month just off the coke, robbing, hijacking trucks, Joker poker vending machines in other states, Connecticut, and all this was under Bruno. This is how crazy it was when he put me on record in '91. We were doing business with another loan shark who was a rogue uh, gangster. He wasn't affiliated with nobody. Albert Calvinese. In fact, if they call him the boss at one time around here afterwards when I went away, but and we were doing business with him, giving him 2 points. We owed him 400,000. This was in the early '90s. Bruno knew nothing about that. And so, like, I'm working with Bruno, but I'm also got 400,000 out with this guy, and I'm still a young kid. I'm only 22 years old, and so it's you know, what they liked about me, the gangsters really liked about me at first was I was a ballsy kid and I was violent. I could, inflict violence. That's what they really want because these guys were old school gangsters, and it come to the day they're gonna want you to pull the trigger. These guys had that old school mentality, especially Bruno, Anthony DeLavo. These guys are gonna be like, hey, I had to kill. Will you get in here without? Because then they resent you afterwards. They don't respect you. When you don't kill, what happens is,
Oh, really?
yeah, they look at you and like, you never busted this guy never did nothing. They don't, even though you're a made guy, they don't look at you like the other made guys that pulled the trigger 4 or 5 times and were involved in multiple hits. So they knew I was violent, and I was also a very, what you don't see in the mafia is you don't see guys that can commit murder, pull that trigger, be violent, and also make millions of dollars.
Yeah.
And that,
I was just going to comment about that. See, some people move in and move up because they're a huge moneymaker, and some people are violent,
sure,
and rarely, are the killers and the ones you can depend on for that. But rarely did I've noticed that you can have both.
right.
And so you could do both, which is interesting. That made you like a double whammy for Bruno, man, especially a
Yeah,
big moneymaker on top of all that. And
sure.
it's like, I think any group of men, you got to prove you're tough. Whatever group of men it is, whether it's a police unit or a football team, or, you got to prove that you're tough.
You're going
And so
to
it's no different, right?
you're going to get tested,
Yeah.
but it is. And even on the streets, there's bullies that bully people and then they bully the wrong person and then they turn into the biggest cowards whatever,
Yeah.
and that's pretty much what it is. Anybody can be a tough guy, and bully guys because of maybe who their father was or who, they got a lot of guys around him. But, going to come a day, what happens if, I gave somebody 50,000 worth of marijuana and the guy said, fuck you, I'm not going to pay you. Well, that guy is going to get shot. And no, that's how you build your reputation. I mean, there's tough guys are a dime a dozen. There's guys that can fight, but pulling that trigger is a totally different level.
Yeah, that's for sure.
And yeah, some guys, you got a guy that's a smaller individual, say he's 5'4", and you got a guy 6 feet tall that knows how to fight MMA style fighting. It's not a fair match, but you take that 5'4" guy and put that pistol in his hand. Who's gonna win?
There's an old saying, big or small, no matter the size, I will equalize. Samuel Colt. So,
Well, you know what I used to always say too? It's like, yeah, I might be 5 foot, say your guy's 5'4", 5'5", right? Yeah, but you got a gun in your pocket. Now I'm what? Now I'm 7'6", you know? Now the tide has turned, it's not,
really.
yeah.
So did you have like a making ceremony then where you eventually inducted and you went through the whole ceremony and everything and had people stand around guarding the door and make sure nobody came in? You had to wear a suit. Is that how that went down?
You got everything right, but with me, I was in my boxers.
Ah,
And
your boxers,
yeah,
you in penitentiary
I,
or something?
I was in my boxers and a bathrobe. I came out with the knife on the table, and all the guys around, like you said, and this and that, and the boss at the table with one of the high-powered captains, and I was in a bathrobe and my boxers with the gun and the knife.
Man, I thought you had to wear a suit to that ceremony.
Back then in the days, they call it the honored society. It was. If you were Italian and that was a dream come true,
Yeah.
you know, to be inducted into the mafia. Anybody that was a wild kid growing up, that's what you wanted. Today, you got to be a nut to ever even want to
Yeah.
get, nothing out there there's nothing that you could say to get your button that it's going to prove to anything, unless it's a networking type business type of corporation type thing where, made guys like a brotherhood, like the Masons or
Yeah.
you know, like a secret group like that, that they help each other out and things like that. It was an honor to uh to be inducted. You had to pull that trigger back then. Some guys escaped through, without having to do it, but I would say, all the way up, the majority back then had to, shoot to get inducted.
Yeah, I believe that. So now you're moving up and you're moving up, but there's only so far to go in this crew. It's not like you're in New York City where there's several crews and you can go to capo and then the next one up above and then underboss and consigliere and all those different ranks. You're a young guy that's immensely successful. You're a racketeer and a gangster, it sounds like, as Sammy the Bull once talked about the difference in the two. And so now where do you go from here? You're looking at Big Al's the boss. Do you aspire for that?
Yeah, so you could still get those same positions here. We're still a family, like even the Genovese family in New York. You got a Manhattan faction, you got a Bronx, faction,
Yeah.
got a New Jersey faction, you got a Florida faction, you got a Massachusetts faction. So you still got the positions of a boss here. What we never did was you don't need an underboss, because you don't have like 300 guys underneath you. So a boss here is pretty much like he's like a captain running a crew. We had so many guys, made guys and associates in throughout Western Mass and Connecticut that they did an article in the Boston Herald and said in 2006, Michelle McPhee wrote front page of the newspaper, and it's on my Instagram. I posted it. She said there was more wise guys and made members of the mafia and associates throughout New England, Western Mass, Connecticut, you know, than anywhere in the country per capita.
Mm.
So meaning, we don't have 10 million people living here, but the amount of gangsters and organized crime associates that we had per amount the people that lived here, we had more compared to what they had in the Bronx and Brooklyn, the strongholds of like where the mafia is. You could still rise up. And I started in 91, but I didn't end up getting made until '03. And along the ways, I mean, I could have got killed. I was a proposed member. Then they wanted to kill me, and then I was proposed again, and then so I was like throughout that time. Not only did I have the illegal stuff, I was involved in like a dozen bar, restaurants, nightclub. I had the biggest nightclub in Connecticut. So that's where I ended up. I had real estate developments that I had. So not just the illegal money, I had legitimate money that I was actually, prospering very well in. Throughout those years, that's what I was doing. In '96, Bruno, I got caught with the marijuana. Bruno wanted to kill me, wanted to chop my head off. He told my father he was going to leave me for dead on my front steps. And so I got shelved. Shelved means like I got banished for like, it was a 2-year period. They can't banish me. I had the biggest crew. I was the biggest money maker. I had the biggest violent guys around me. And all I did was I just networked in other cities and made more connections. I was dealing with captains in New York City and the other families, Boston, everywhere I was going, dealing Connecticut. And so I just started building up, reputations and networking, and I didn't get inducted until '03 in that life.
So I guess there came a time when you and Al Bruno bumped heads for real.
Me and Al Bruno had like a father-son relationship. It was exactly the way it was. He used to go to my father and say, "Why does your son always go against the grain? Why is he?" My father would be like, "Ah, he's crazy," things like that. He didn't want me hanging around one time with this kid Emilio Fusco, who's a made guy in our area in Springfield, and he says, "I don't want you hanging around with Emilio." I said, "Why not?" I go, "You talk with him." He goes, "I don't want you to hang around him." I go out that night. Who am I with? The kid Emilio. He comes to my house the next day, Bruno, because we used to have to settle up and do the work once a week. He goes, "You go out last night?" It was Saturday. This is every Sunday he would come over my house. He said, "You go out last night?" He goes, "Yeah." He goes, "Who are you? Are you with the kid Emilio?" Now he knew because everybody told him everything. Everyone reported back to him. He goes, "You were with Emilio?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "But why do you always define me? Why did I tell you not to hang around with him? Do you hang around him?" So we had a relationship where we, was like father son. But I know that he really, um, he wanted to make me with him. Bruno's problem was he wanted too much control of you. Like, he would investigate me worse than the IRS could. Like he goes, "How do you do it?" He goes, "You're out to dinner every night." He goes, "You got a wife, you got 3 kids." He goes, "You don't work." He goes, and you're out. You got cigar. You here? I go, "Bruno." I go, "When I go out, we all chop up the bill." He was like on me like that, and because the reason was because like his son would always run back to him and tell him I'm in the drug business, and then he used to tell, if I find out Anthony's in the drug business, I'm going to chop him in half. I'm going to cut him in half. So that's what I was dealing with. It was like 50-50. Could I have gotten killed? Absolutely. So we never had a falling out where we hated each other ever. It was just all little things like that. When I got caught with the marijuana, if he ever knew the millions and millions of dollars that I made and he never got a penny of it, that he would stick to his stomach if he ever found if anyone ever knew. But I was just good at that. I was just good at making money and being good about not, flashy. Like his
Yeah.
son was flashy. I didn't need to walk around with $100,000 watch and driving around with brand new Mercedes or anything. I was fit. I'm about making the money. So me and Bruno never had a thing where I could say I hate that guy. Like Emilio Fusco, I wanted to kill him. Every other guy I wanted to kill. I could tell you dozens of guys I wanted to kill. Right? And they, it was just we had hatred. Emilio was a made guy. He came from Italy and they made him in like '96. And he tried to get me killed several times. And I swore, I told him, I said, "I'm going to kill this kid one day. We're the same age." But me and Bruno never had I've never had feelings like that towards him. And he never, it was never like that. Like I said, it was like a father son type relationship. I mean, I pled guilty to killing him, but it was not like, and that's hard to believe, but it wasn't like what's reported
I
and,
see.
and the way it went down. And that's pretty much why I wrote the book. And that's pretty much why I do podcasts and to tell people, what really, I don't try to say I'm innocent at all, but it's not what they think went down the way it went down.
Interesting.
That's what I'm trying to say. I'm guilty, and I'm not saying I'm not,
Yeah.
but it's not the way, it went down the way like, I wanted to take his position or,
Yeah. Okay.
anything like that or the motive. And I could walk you through the whole thing and you got common sense. You're going to be like, yeah, you're definitely involved in it, but you'll understand what I'm talking about.
Guys, that's why you got to get this book. It's got to give you a real inside look at how this thing that we study, we talk about, we're interested in, and we want to know more about how it works. If you really want to find out how it works. Now, I've got one last question here for you. I got to know about Freddie and Ty Geas. I know you know them. You were close to them. They were in your crew, I believe.
They heard if they heard the way you just said their last name, they would probably want to do to you.
They want to do me like they did the Whitey.
It was funny. It was fun. It was funny because we were in trial and they were going to the trial. The judge, but he wasn't calling them geese. He was calling them Geas.
Gaius.
Because it's spelled Eas.
Yeah.
So he was calling them Geas. And
How about Gias?
Geas, that's how you say it.
Yes.
Yeah,
All
yeah.
right.
So, you know, the paranoid schizophrenic Ty got all upset because the way the judge was referring to his last name. But he was paranoid over that. Well, yeah,
That's
what were you ask me about them?
that's kind of like I got an Italian FBI agent that came here back in the '60s, and I know him really well. He's retired now. We talk all the time, and we both worked the mob in Kansas City. And he said, "Yeah, when I first came here, everybody was an Italian."
Yeah,
So
yeah,
anyhow, I catch myself saying that once in a while.
yeah.
Old habits are hard to break. So, what was the deal with them? I mean, these are a couple of bad dudes. A little bit I've read about them, and of course they hit the headlines big time. And that murder was brutal, man. I mean, it
Right,
was brutal.
right. Well, listen, here's the story with them. I used to call them the Beverly Hillbillies. You know the Beverly Hillbillies?
Yeah, oh yeah,
So they originally, I think they were born in California, and they migrated to I think Worcester for a little bit, and then Springfield, West Springfield. They were the family owned a jewelry store, and they were nothing on the streets. Like, reason I call them hillbillies, like I met Ty in prison. We were both young kids, and we're both in state prison our first time ever. And he used to chew tobacco. He was like a hillbilly. I used to call him a hillbilly. Like, we had plans when we got out. Freddie, the brother, believe this or not, was a prison guard. Freddie was a prison guard. I'm in state prison. I meet his brother, and me and the brother were always in trouble, getting into fights in there. And they warned us, next time you guys fuck around, we're gonna ship you to the max, which was Walpole, one of the most dangerous prisons in America. Sure enough, he ends up beating up the Spanish kid, and they shipped him out, and he went, and I was supposed to, and I was getting out in February of 91. He was getting out in March of 91. Well, he ends up beating up a guard. Yeah. So he doesn't get out until 96, and he did like 4 years straight in the hole. But they were good kids. They weren't killers then. They were just, type of kids that would fight ball just like me. They weren't my muscle. They were friends of mine that if we had an issue and I says, guys, come on, they would come with me. Just like if they needed someone to come with them. They were very ballsy kids, just like us, just like me and guys I grew up with my whole life. We're all ballsy kids growing up. And as the years went on, Ty ended up coming home. So then when I got out in 91, I started to hang around with Freddie. Was no longer a prison guard. And, they knew nothing about making money on the streets. Their thing was, Freddie's thing was, because Ty was still a young kid, he don't even know nothing on the streets, was, credit card fraud, things like that, maybe low level selling a little coke, and to scam guys, nothing like that. When I started hanging around him, that's when I started, getting him involved with selling some marijuana. We were hijacking trucks. We started making money doing that. I did a little loan sharking with him. He used to come to me. I used to give him the money. He'd have guys that want to borrow 30,000. We gave it to this one of these guys one time, and we are charging them high amounts of juice. I think we're charging them 4 points. We're getting like 1,200 a week off the guy, and he couldn't pay anymore. Next thing you know, we took over the guy's bar, and then after that, we were partners in his bar in Westfield, and then we ended up becoming the partners with the guy's bar in Cape Cod, which was like doing 5 million a year in gross back in the '90s. So that's how I started making money with Freddie. And then these guys never killed anyone prior to that. They were tough kids. If I needed them to go around, I would, bring them. Would end up, and I could go on and on and on and on and on stories with them. But, it gets reported that they were muscle for me. They were never muscle. They never did anything for me. If we had to go shoot someone, I would go shoot with them. If we had to go beat someone, which we beat several people up, I was right there by the side, smashing people's with clubs and bats and knives and everything. Muscle to me is when you say to somebody, "Hey, go give that guy a beat and report back to me," type of thing. I didn't build my crew like that. I get accused of having a biggest crew. I don't call it a crew. I call it a network of friends that, I networked, and I consider you my friend. I have you at my house. You come to dinner. I sell you 100 pounds of marijuana a week. You don't report. I'm not your boss. Next week, you might sell me the marijuana. So that's how I considered them. And I considered them the same thing. Things just started getting very deep. The mafia in the mafia world in Springfield, New York started coming in. I mean, it's a story, Gary, that I could go on and talk till tomorrow night to
Yeah.
explain treachery that happened, what they did. But it just started getting a lot more serious, where the beatings. Now we're talking about murders and murder plots and murder conspiracies, and then we started committing murders, and they were with me, and on my first hit that I did for the Genovese family in New York was in New York City. Them two brothers came with me. That's how I got made into the family. We went and shot a union guy 9 times on the streets of New York. And so the two brothers came with me to do that hit. And that was like a ballsy move to do something like that. We had to travel 2.5 hours to New York. We had to get there, wait there with silencers for the guy to come out of his house. I mean, there's a lot of risk involved in there.
Yeah, that's a lot of
Meaning,
risk.
who knows if the guy's got a gun and shoots back? I mean, not only what you're going to jail, but maybe you get killed, right? They were good kids. Fast forward, they could be out here talking with me just like you are talking to me right now. And they chose a different path, and that's why they're in prison. Freddie ends up killing Whitey Bulger in prison. It was reported that they didn't stab him. What happened was they he hit him with a lock and a sock, and Whitey was so old that the bruising of hitting a 90-year-old man that's in a wheelchair, the bruising that it was causing made his eyes bulge out of his head. His whole face got so swollen that it looked like his eyes got gouged out. And this is coming right from the guy in West Virginia that like when the how you call it the path forensic pathologist.
The forensic guy.
Yeah, like one of the guys.
Guy that did the autopsy.
Yeah, the guys that he would know exactly, because it was put it all. He hates rats, and that's why he killed a guy. Listen, if he did hate rats, then why? How could he be a prison guard ever? You just don't flip on a night's the light, and one day you're locking guys up in their cells, and the next minute you're killing them because it was nothing that they report that for. It was for notoriety purposes that went down and everything.
Interesting. Well, it was quite a shock. I remember when I first read the headlines. It's like, oh my God,
yeah. I had
this is shocking.
People call me up, and I was, I just had
bet.
prison in 17, and this happened in 18, and I had got the first job I ever got in my life was selling cars. I never had a job in my life. I worked for my father. That was it. So I had I got a job. It was good. I started selling cars. I don't know nothing about cars, nothing about engines, anything about that. Right. And so somebody tells me, calls me up, and they said, hey, Whitey Bulger just got killed. I said, so what? And they said, who's in the prison that he got killed in? I said, Freddie. I knew right away he did it, because that's the type of, if you knew Freddie, that's a type of something that he would want to do for the notoriety of it. Now I'm, worried because they were co-defendants of mine on one of the trials that we beat, got found not guilty in '07. I'm at the work, and it was national news, worldwide news, because Whitey was like, I think #2 on the most wanted list behind Bin Laden, right?
Yeah,
for a long time.
Yes, he was.
With that, I'm on the TV. They're showing pictures of me because naturally, they're going to link me with them. Like, who's Freddie? Like, when you say who's Freddie, all right, he killed Whitey. But if he didn't kill Whitey, nobody would know who Freddie is. Yeah. Right? Right. So now then, who is this guy? Oh, he worked for the Genovese family guys, and that's how you're going to refer to him. So when they say that, I was the boss of, so they say work for me. You know what I'm saying?
And he did work with you.
He worked with me. Yeah, we did. Like, I never considered him a subordinate, or there were just guys that were in my crew that I had guys that were 10 times more killers than they only killed. The only guys they ever shot and killed was when they were with me. Mm-hmm. They didn't kill no one else or shoot anywhere else. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, were they tough kids? Absolutely. Do they got balls? But we all had balls. We had a lot of guys like that back then.
Yeah, it's crazy world you came up in. Guys, you got to get this book. There it is.
Yeah.
South End Syndicate, How I Took Over the Genovese Springfield Crew. Anthony Arillotta. Anthony, this has been great. I really appreciate you being so candid with us and kind of telling us how it is. And guys like you, it's been this big mystery for a long time, and how all this works, especially for me. And I came up, I was a young policeman out here following these guys around, and I never knew what was going on I just knew that they went from here to here, and they had this license plate, and they met this person, they had this business, and they went there, and so it's been a real revelation for me these last few years talking to you guys. I'm glad you're talking. Now
Yeah,
you got a YouTube channel, correct?
yeah. So you probably got some amazing stories too in your line of act.
Well, not quite that amazing, but
Someone got to pull those stories out of you one day. No, but yeah. So I got a Instagram is my name, Anthony Arillotta. I'm on Facebook. I'm on all that stuff, social media. But I have a wine coming out. It's called Pazzo, Pazzo. In Italian, that means crazy.
yeah.
And it's a good story. My father was in the wine grape business, so I'm proud that I'm involved in the wine business itself. It'll be out for pre-orders next week, and then it's launching in March, where it's actually going to be able to be distributed. And yeah, I have a mafia YouTube channel called Mafia Money, Mayhem, and the Mafia.
Okay.
And I'm going to be starting that back up because I have to sell. I'm not in the selling business. I'm selling wine and books, and so I got to start. A lot of people are interested in this mob genre. I get so many messages a day. When are you coming back? When are you coming back? When are you coming back? So I am gonna come back. I don't and I like talking about everything, not just mob stuff. So a lot of people out there, I get DM people that are depressed, people that want to eat, live healthy, people, how do you get through adversity? Like I love talking about all that stuff. I like, I think like that's what I can, help people, like give back to people. So, if I can help anybody get through something through the, how I lived would be that. So yeah, going forward, that's what I got going on. No, I'm helping. I got my cousin and my nephew. My nephew's MMA, and my cousin in Worcester, Danny Dochimo, he's fighting. My nephew's fighting this week. My Danny Dochimo's fighting February 15th. I'm helping out all those young kids in the Worcester area. Young kids, good kids that will get them off the streets and get them into the boxing. I'm sponsor them. I get them. I help them with their fighting and get them because they have nobody and they're going to end up going to prison. So this way, keep them on the right road.
All right, great. Anthony, thanks a lot for coming on the show.
Hey, Gary, thanks for having me. Great job. Good talking to you.
All right. Guys, I like to ride motorcycles, so watch out for motorcycles when you're out there on the street. And if you have a problem with PTSD, if you've been in the service, go to the VA website and they have a hotline on there. And if you have a problem with drugs or alcohol, Anthony Ruggiano, he's a drug and alcohol counselor down in Florida, of all things, and he has a hotline on one of his website or his YouTube channel. I can never remember. This is not a paid promotion for him. I just want to give you some resources out there that I think would be entertaining too or fun for you. And if you have a problem with gambling, there's plenty of resources out there for that. So we all need help once in a while, and I'll be the first one to admit it. And my life has been a whole lot better since I asked for it back years ago. So thanks a lot, Anthony Arillotta and South End Syndicate, How I Took Over the Genovese Springfield Crew. And get that book, guys. Thanks, Anthony.
Thank you.